On OCD Space today, we've got a very important video because there is an epidemic out there. There is actually a large group of people who are good people who are feeling very bad about themselves. The very people in the world that should be feeling good are feeling bad, and this is a major problem. But good news, it's all about OCD, and we're going to figure out how to get out of it today. So if you're liking these videos, please like and subscribe, and let's get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to OCD Space. I'm Mike Parker, and this is your place for all things OCD. Now, I'm excited today. We've got a big topic, and it really needs to be addressed because so many of you out there are struggling with this feeling that you're a bad person, and it doesn't need to be that way. We want to recognize how OCD has tricked you into feeling this way, and we can get out of this trick. And I'm ready. I've got my PMA shirt. This is the positive mental attitude from early 80s hardcore and punk, and we are going to get back to positive living, a positive attitude about ourselves, a positive outlook about ourselves. That's what getting out of OCD is all about. So let's first talk about how this occurs, because when we look at people struggling with this form of OCD, we're going to see people that are doing everything they can to be a good person and feeling like a bad person. How the heck does this happen? Well, it happens because there's something called obsessional doubt that occurs when you have OCD. It's a mental thought process that you're vulnerable to. And basically it involves rejecting or questioning or doubting the information that's right in front of you in reality. So if we were to look at your life right now, we won't see this overwhelming evidence that you are a bad person in some way. There aren't cops beating it down your door. There aren't people calling left and right, cursing you out, saying how much you hurt them and how awful you've been. And we're just not going to see that kind of evidence, right? And yet, you're not going to trust that information. That's going to be the nature of the doubt. Reality doesn't feel trustworthy. It doesn't feel like I have enough information here. And I actually really want to go deeper, and I want to go beyond what my senses are telling me. And that's really where OCD starts. And where this leads is really into your imagination. Because when you want to look beyond the information you have available through your senses, there's only one place to go. There's no other information to be collected, and you end up exploring possibilities in your imagination. And these possibilities start to feel real. You start to imagine that this is really who you are. Maybe I am a bad person. Maybe I'm a dishonest person. Maybe I'm someone who just doesn't care about other people. Maybe I'm someone who actually wants to hurt people. Maybe I'm just evil. We start to look at how you're imagining these things, and you actually have corresponding feelings. You start to feel anxiety, guilt, and shame, and whatever other emotions come with that. And this is because your nervous system doesn't care if something's happening in reality or you're imagining it. It triggers the same response. So if you're going to imagine this yourself as this horrible person, your nervous system's going to be like, okay, well, we better turn on the guilt feeling. We better turn on the shame feeling. We better pump up the anxiety here. And, that's what's occurring with OCD. And this is all happening up here, right? Not out here in life. And it becomes very convincing. It feels real. And you really feel like you need to address this doubt that you're a bad person. So that's really what's happening with obsessional doubt. Now, what I want to look at today are some of the reasons that OCD uses to convince you to distrust reality and to go into your imagination. And let's go through these and debunk them one by one, because they are all false logic. They're all false reasoning. Let's take a look. So one of the big things that occurs when you've got OCD is you can fall back on compulsive behaviors. Once you've got this concern in your mind, what if I'm bad? You can start to do a lot of checking and testing behaviors. And so what is going to happen there is I wake up in the morning, I'm already concerned I might be a bad person. I've been living with this concern for a while now. And what am I going to do about that? I'm going to actually observe my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions throughout the day in this very specific way. I'm looking for any evidence of bad behavior. And so I'm noticing when I might have gotten angry towards someone. I'm noticing when I didn't tell someone the absolute truth. And, what all this ends up happening is this all becomes evidence in your mind. This all becomes support. But we want to recognize that this sort of checking behavior, this testing behavior, is leading you on this biased investigation where you're looking for any imperfect behavior you do, and you will find all of the imperfect behavior because you're human, and this is just what it means to be human. We're not perfect creatures, and there's no such thing as perfect, right? And so you're going to notice all these things. And so any information, any evidence collected through checking and testing is completely invalid and should not be used to support any actual conclusions about yourself. This is not good evidence. If this was a scientific study, this would be ripped up and defunded because you're not objective. You're looking for an answer and you're getting the information that you want. And that's what's happening when you're checking and testing. So we really want to recognize any information collected in this manner, get rid of it, and learn to stop that compulsive behavior. What we really want to do is live under the assumption that we're actually a good person, that we are a fine person, and that information will be overwhelming and will come to our senses if we do have to reevaluate our life decisions. If we really have done something really bad, the evidence will be overwhelming. Someone will come up to us extremely angry and get us to notice all the horrible things we're doing. Cops will be banging on our door. We will be in prison for horrible things. These are the sort of things that, like, okay, now is the time to think about whether I'm a good person or not, or whether I at least need to rethink my behavior. So that's what we're really looking to say. When would this actually be a doubt worth exploring? What in reality needs to happen? I'm not going to do any checking and testing until this actual evidence comes my way. And before that, I'm going to actually assume that I'm a good person. And that's what really normal, non-obsessional reasoning looks like. And we want to get back to that place. All right, so let's look at some of the other reasons OCD convinces you to doubt. I'm having bad thoughts, right? I was walking down the street and I thought about pushing that person into traffic, or, I just had a bad thought about, that person I was just interacting with. I noticed something about them and I shouldn't be thinking that, or I shouldn't be criticizing people in my mind, right? You're going to start to notice I'm having all these bad thoughts. We want to recognize that these thoughts are being generated because you're having an obsession. You have primed yourself for this, right? So when you are thinking to yourself, don't have bad thoughts, you're going to notice anything that seems bad. And then you're going to actually start maybe parroting bad thoughts in your mind, because this is what we call an ironic process. When you're trying not to have something, it's going to happen more. So that's going to be part of that problem, that, you're going to be having bad thoughts because of OCD, not because you're a bad person. So we really want to blame OCD when warranted. And OCD is making you have these thoughts. Now, the other thing we want to add is that, just random bad thoughts also do pop into everybody's mind. And that's not any reason to think you are a bad person. This is more of an ACT approach, right? Thoughts are just thoughts. They occur to you. And it's not the thought popping in your mind that's the problem, right? That's just, the brain at work, the imagination at work. Like, what crazy thought can I think of in this moment right now? What we are really concerned with are thoughts that have actual intention and motivation behind them. Those are bad thoughts, right? And we know those because you're actually intending to do something bad. You are planning it out right now as we speak because you want to do it so badly, right? And we want to recognize with OCD that's never the case. It's always the opposite. When you've got scrupulosity and morality OCD, you hate these thoughts. You find them repugnant. You don't like them. And that's who you really are. And so it's not the thoughts that tell you if you're a bad person or not. It's actually just how you feel about the thoughts. That's the most important indication of who you are. So noticing what you actually think about bad thoughts, notice how you're bothered by them, notice how they make you anxious. That's the real you, not the thought itself. Another thing we're going to see come up is I'm having feelings, right? I'm feeling guilty, for example, right? If I'm feeling guilty, maybe I really did do something wrong. Maybe I am really a bad person. And once again, we want to really emphasize that when you are telling a negative self story in your mind, the corresponding emotion is going to occur. And this is all about a story that you are immersed in. Think about this idea of you being a bad person, this obsession, and notice how you're living it, right? And you're living it day to day in your imagination. And that is actually going to cause this emotion. And it's actually going to be an internal kind of feedback loop, right? I'm telling myself a story about myself that's making me feel guilty. Now I'm thinking because I'm guilty, I'm a bad person, and I'm going around and around. We want to get out of that process by starting to notice I have OCD. I spend a lot of time in my imagination. My imagination is creating a guilty feeling. But you know what? Once I identify this situation for what it is, that guilty feeling might not immediately dissipate. But what I can start to say is this is not a good signal to be listening to. I know that this guilty feeling is occurring because of OCD. And so that's not an actual valid experience of guilt. When I actually do something harmful to someone and they've made it known to me that they are hurt and they actually have, presented it to me and now I know this is happening and I feel guilty, that would just be a reality-based situation that you can deal with, right? You can actually address it with the person in reality. But when you're exploring all these possibilities in your mind and going into them in your imagination, there's nothing to address here. And we need to start to say, this is an OCD created feeling, and I'm going to start ignoring it. I'm going to start ignoring this feeling and recognizing that it's not happening at the right time. Are you someone interested in inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy for OCD? Well, I have 2 trainings available online, one for clinicians and a self-help course for people with OCD. If you're interested, check them out on my website, icbttrainingonline.com. Another thing we can see getting pulled into the OCD reasoning is rules. And this is something that particularly might be happening with religious forms of scrupulosity, right? So thou shalt not blank, pick your sin. And we're going to notice how you can take that and take it to the extreme. So if you've got rules that you should never lie, that you should, never think a bad thought in your brain, and then you're applying this to yourself in this very intense perfectionistic way, this rule is really getting in your way. This rule is making you feel bad about yourself. And that's because of the way you're applying the rule. There's nothing wrong, obviously, for believing in these tenets of your religion and believing in these rules. But what we want to do is be passionate and be committed to these rules, to these tenets, to these values. But we want to hold them lightly towards ourselves because we are human beings. And this is not how these rules were meant to be practiced. So do some thinking about your religion if you're falling into this trap where you're applying these rules to yourself in this extreme way where, if you make the slightest mistake now, you think you need to feel guilty or bad about yourself, we want to recognize that's not how these rules are meant to be applied. This is about doing the best you can and being a human being, being compassionate towards yourself, and continuing to always work on getting better. That's really what rules and ideals are for. They're not meant to be applied to ourselves in a way that we make ourselves feel shameful and guilty all the time. So just be careful of that when you're using rules to make yourself feel like a bad person. So another thing is going to be sense gaps. This is another big OCD trick. And this is going to be when there's an area in life where there's a place where your senses can't go. And OCD is just making you think nonstop about that area. So where we're going to see this often with morality and scrupulosity is when you recognize that you can't know what God is thinking about you. And this is a sense gap because there's there's no coffee shop you can go to and ask God's opinion and get a sense of what God's thinking about you, right? And so this is a textbook OCD trick because your senses can't go there. Well, then why don't you think about all the possible bad things that could be happening? And this is very convincing, right? It feels like, oh, since I can't ever know for sure what could be going on in this area where my mind and my eyesight and my hearing can't go, that I should actually explore bad possibilities. And we want to say, no, this is absolutely OCD logic, right? We just accept sense gaps in life and we trust in ourselves, and we don't actually use these sense gaps as a jumping off point to go into possibilities and scary stories in our imagination. That's where we want to interrupt this obsessional doubt process. It's okay that this is a place where your senses can't go. And there are going to be lots of places all over the place where you can recognize that you live with sense gaps without going into possibility. So if you have this fear of being a bad person or an immoral person, you might not have contamination OCD. So you might not be thinking about, oh my gosh, my eyes can't see what's on this doorknob all the time, right? You're not using that sense gap to go into scary possibilities. And there's all sorts of forms of OCD like that, where, when you have this form, you think, oh, this sense gap is so validating of my OCD. And then we can notice, though, but look at all these other sense gaps in life. You could care less that you don't know what's going on over there, right? So we want to recognize this biased doubting process. Some other logic that sometimes works. We want to recognize when you're using stories that you hear, we call this hearsay, when you're reading stories online, true crime, whatever it might be, and then asking yourself, oh, could I be that kind of person, right? Maybe even a character in a movie or a character in a book that had this horrible, they were a bad person in some way and they had something bad happen to them, and you've become convinced, oh, you could be that kind of person too. We want to recognize that this comes from a lack of trust in the self and a lack of self-knowledge about the self, which is very common with OCD, because what we really want to do when you're using a story from the internet or someone else's story, you want to say, well, is that you? That's actually that character's story, and that person has nothing to do with you. And at the end of this video, I'm actually going to throw in some tips for how to get back in touch with self-knowledge, but just recognizing other people's stories that you read about on true crime or hear about from your relatives or wherever it might be, those are not you. You are your own person in your own context, and you're allowed to collect information about you and notice that you are a good person. You're not that bad person you read about. One other thing that really gets people is this idea that there could be a hidden version of yourself. And this would basically lead you to believe, well, I shouldn't trust how I act in reality. I shouldn't trust any of the information I collect about myself because it's not the real me in some way. And so some of the ways that OCD is going to convince you that that's not the real you that you present in reality is, number one, yeah, I've got this dark hidden self. Maybe you read about something in psychology that says there's some sort of unconscious self or something like that. Or you saw a movie where there was a dark self that came out, or even if you've, again, read articles online about someone who seemed like a normal person and snapped or something like that. We want to really watch out for this logic that there's some sort of version of you that you're not even aware of, that you don't even know about, and it's going to come out sometime. This is not how that works. You actually have all the information about yourself. You know who you are. There's nothing deeper to find. And so this idea of going deeper, searching within your psyche for some sort of bad version, this is going to again be a biased thought process that's going to just lead you to imagine dark things about yourself. So we don't want to fall for this trick that I can find some version of myself under the surface. And some things that kind of are related to this, or maybe just thinking that you're someone who's just lying to yourself about who you are, or you're a fake person in some way, or, you can never really know who you are. These ideas that you can't actually develop self-knowledge, these are all flawed reasoning. Again, we're going to get to a tip for that in a minute. So those are some of the big arguments that OCD gets to get you to doubt the information you actually have in reality, and to get you to explore the possibility that you're a bad person in your imagination. Now I'm going to talk about a few tips for getting you back on track, getting you to know yourself again, because you're getting acquainted with a possible false version of yourself in your imagination, and it's time for you to meet your real self again. Welcome back to the real world where your senses are, and let's have you meet yourself again. So number one, I want to throw out this question. I've used this in other videos as well, but you want to ask yourself, what sort of person worries about the things that I worry about, right? So think about all the questions you ask yourself all day. Could I be the sort of person who would want to hurt people? Am I just a lying, deceitful person? Am I just someone who wants bad things to happen to other people? Am I a bad mom? Am I a bad daughter? Am I a bad son? All these things. What sort of person spends this much time exploring these questions? Someone who is the opposite, someone who cares about these things, someone who is good, someone who has good morals and values and is bothered by these things. Even remember that idea of the bad thoughts, right? What kind of person gets disturbed by bad thoughts? What kind of person doesn't like having bad thoughts? Someone who doesn't like thinking about bad things, right? A good person, someone who likes thinking about people being good to one another and people not hurting each other, right? So we want to recognize that the worry itself is not evidence of anything, right? What kind of person does this kind of worrying is a good person. And so recognizing, even in your OCD, even in the things you spend your time thinking about, we see evidence of actually who you really are. A bad person does not worry about these things, right? Would have to be shaken and told that they're doing something really bad by someone before they'll even consider self-reflection. And so recognizing that this is your goodness that's making you worry about this. Now, the other thing that we really want to get back in touch with is what we call the inner senses. And the inner senses are your intentions, your motivations, and your desires, your values, your morals. So the more you can start to spend some time getting to know what you really value, what you care about, writing that stuff down and not going into doubt, right? Stopping yourself from making contact with your imagination, stopping yourself from asking the what if, just writing down, what you really think about your values and what's important to you. And then we want to notice, again, what your true desires and intentions are in life, that you are someone who is motivated to be a good person. So getting back in touch with your inner senses is part of this process that I'm talking about right now. And this is information that is totally there for the taking. You know what your actual intentions and motivations are. They tell, your actions show that, right? If you actually were motivated and intending to harm others, for example, you would have a plan and you would be doing it today. You would want to do it. And what we see with OCD is I have thoughts and feelings I don't like. because that's the last thing I would want to do. I don't want to think about this. I wouldn't even want to consider this. And we want to recognize that's the real you. That gets lost in the OCD, that these are your real intentions. And then one other thing I want to recommend to everybody is to start to really know the real you. Consider doing an exercise every day, which is to notice 3 things that you do on a daily basis, and notice the qualities that those actions demonstrate. And so it could be something as simple as opening the door for someone, or giving someone a call, or giving someone a compliment, or saying something nice to someone. We want to start to recognize the real you exists in reality. The real you is not to be found in possibility in your imagination. It's in your basic actions, the decisions that guide you during the day. This is real information about you. This isn't you being fake. This isn't you being, some sort of false version of yourself. This is you. It's on the surface. It's simple. It's easy. This is self-knowledge. And so even if you're having really bad depression, really bad OCD, but you notice that you got up today and you tried your best to challenge OCD, or you made it to your therapy appointment, whatever it might be, we're noticing what are the qualities that we can see in this. Someone who really cares, someone who's really trying their best. And we want to get back in touch with that. That is the real you. And so my final concluding recommendation is just put all this stuff together and start to recognize the real you is there to be found in reality. You don't have to be looking for anything else. And it's all about trusting who you are in reality and starting to let that in, and starting to, even journal about yourself, or start to write down things about your values and your intentions and who you really are, and getting back in touch with who you really are. This is going to be critical to overcoming OCD and feeling like a good person again, because you deserve it. You are a good person. You have OCD, and OCD is to blame for all of this. And it's going to involve opening your eyes back up to recognize how you've been tricked into this false story. So I hope this has been helpful, guys. Again, this is like a long video, but if you made it this far, I hope it was helpful. And there's just a lot that we need to talk about in this area when it comes to OCD, because there's just too many people suffering, and they don't need to be suffering. So anyway, until next time, hope you guys all take care of yourselves and trust yourselves.